Jade, you have the parole, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's the afternoon now. Yep. Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's really great to be here with you today. I want to thank everyone who's contributed to today's forum, especially the team who've worked tirelessly over the last few weeks, months to get us all here to discuss these important issues. We're also, of course, grateful to everyone on the panel for being here and for their commitment to advancing tolerance and understanding. This morning, we've heard compelling voices and important perspectives. Now it's time to reflect on what comes next. It's true that levels of tolerance, once considered an inherent quality of our human nature, have dangerously eroded in our time. The digital age has worsened this situation. We need to acknowledge again, perhaps, why this has happened, the risks involved, and all that we can do collectively to reclaim our innate capacity for empathy. It goes almost without saying how much technological advances have transformed our world, connecting us across continents and cultures, but we're mostly also aware how much tech advancement has brought unintended consequences that undermine tolerance. Too many well-meaning community internet groups have devolved into battlegrounds of opposing views because the algorithms prioritize the most inflammatory content. What begins as a space for connection often transforms into a breeding ground for division and hostility. So the majority of social media platforms that were designed to connect us have often intensified divisions. Algorithms prioritize sensationalism over truth, feeding echo chambers and fanning hate speech. And as we've heard from Dr. Renard, misinformation has spread faster than ever before, distorting perceptions and deepening mistrust and allowing space for extremist ideology. For a time, there were some concerted efforts to curb this growing propensity for online communities to be led by the Pied Piper of misinformation. Worryingly, though, this new year started with the announcement that less and not more regulation would be the way forward. Recently, Meta announced that they'd shift away from fact-checking, replacing it with a crowdsourced community note system. Content previously restricted for being too political, such as discussions on immigration, for example, will now be reintroduced into people's feeds. While this has been framed as a step towards greater freedom of expression, it also clearly risks opening the door again to greater misinformation and hate speech. But tolerance attrition is not unique to our time. History reminds us that periods of upheaval and rapid change often breed fear and intolerance. Social tensions rose rapidly, for example, during the Industrial Revolution, and xenophobia has always flared up in the aftermath of global conflicts and terrorist activities. Today's related challenges, however, are arguably more complex because of the unprecedented speed and scale of digital communication. The detachment inherent in online interaction strips away the humanizing elements of face-to-face dialogue, tone, expression, body language that remind us of the shared humanity in other, and allows extremism to persist. Hate speech, cyberbullying, and online radicalization are symptoms of this deeper erosion of empathy. Empathy is the foundation of tolerance, but it requires more than symbolic gestures. Imagine an education system that's universal, equipping young minds with the ability to critically engage with different perspectives, whether through literature, whether through history, or immersive experiences that challenge preconceptions. True understanding arises not just from imagining other people's experiences, but sustained engagement with the complexities of other people's realities. Education, of course, is not enough. A culture of tolerance is built not only in classrooms, but in workplaces, governing bodies, and everyday interactions where respect and recognition shape our collective future. In addressing intolerance, it's critical to recognise the intersection with other global challenges, such as climate change. As Madam Thompson-Florence said, the climate crisis disproportionately affects marginalised communities, worsening inequalities. These impacts create a sense of shared responsibility and solidarity. When communities work together across cultural and societal divides, they can address resource scarcity, displacement and competition more effectively. This reduces the potential for conflict and develops practical cooperative solutions, as Mr. Demier pointed out. Today's insights strengthen our collective understanding and inform the urgency of what must come next. This is why I'm here today representing OIPMA. We want to call for an international decade of tolerance, as Ambassador McLachlan said, from 2025 to 2035. This initiative is a call to action for the international community to prioritise tolerance as a fundamental pillar of sustainable peace and development. Dr. Reynard introduced 5 key lessons. The International Decade of Tolerance will be built on 5 key priorities. The first would be advancing global education for tolerance. While efforts like UNESCO's global citizenship education have laid important groundwork, gaps remain in implementation and impact because UNESCO can only do so much. The focus must now shift to ensuring learning systems at all levels equip individuals with the knowledge, critical thinking and intercultural understanding necessary to promote inclusive society. This means governments supporting integration of tolerance education into school curricula, but also ensuring that it's consistently applied, adequately resourced and reinforced through training and conflict resolution anti-bias approaches. The second priority would be strengthening economic and social inclusion. Despite many years' workforce diversity measures and economic inclusion policies, inequalities persist. And in many cases, efforts have unintentionally fueled division. The goal must be to design economic policies that promote fairness without creating resentment and further division. Social protections must be expanded to ensure economic instability does not deepen polarisation, and public institutions must provide fair access to essential services such as healthcare, housing and education, ensuring that inclusion efforts strengthen rather than fracture social cohesion. The third priority, upholding human rights and dignity. International human rights agreements have for a long time, aimed to tackle intolerance, but without strong enforcement mechanisms, the impact has been uneven. Strengthening anti-hate speech laws and ensuring they're applied fairly across societies is critical. Governments need to improve enforcement of existing anti-discrimination legislation and commit to addressing trends in intolerance through independent oversight bodies and civil society engagement. Rather than introducing new legislation and declarations, the focus must be on making existing protections effective, responsive and universally applied. The fourth, be encouraging greater intercultural and interfaith dialogue. Previous international initiatives have promoted dialogue, as Dr. Ramkaj discussed, but many remain confined to formal settings without reaching the communities that are most affected by division. The challenge is not simply creating more platforms, but ensuring they bring about real understanding and engagement. Governments and international organisations should invest in initiatives that bring together cultural and religious groups and supporting grassroots fora where people can engage in honest discussions and collaborations and shared problem solving, just in the way Dr. Karam described. Media and tech platforms can be part of the solution, not just by highlighting shared values, but actively curbing narratives that only serve to provoke. The fifth and last priority would be ensuring accountability and leadership for tolerance. Political leaders and institutions have pledged for a very long time to commitments to tolerance, yet progress has been slow and inconsistent. This new decade must bring about a shift from rhetoric to measurable action. Governments must commit to rejecting divisive rhetoric, not only in policy, but in public discourse. Institutions can track and report progress in combating intolerance through transparent, standardised benchmarks. Businesses must move beyond symbolic diversity efforts and integrate meaningful representation into leadership and decision-making, tolerance being a key competence in that regard. International organisations must establish reporting mechanisms that measure and assess progress, ensuring accountability so that commitments lead to real, sustained momentum. These priorities form the foundation for a global movement towards tolerance, reinforcing the essential connection between inclusion, human dignity, and sustainable peace and development. The Decade of Tolerance needs to focus on implementation, measurable outcomes, and accountability, ensuring that tolerance becomes an enduring principle of global cooperation. This would be with civil society and businesses engaging in co-development policies that promote tolerance. And as Dr. Markovic said, governments committing to implementing the International Decade of Tolerance with measurable targets, and ultimately the UN establishing an annual global report tracking progress on tolerance and initiatives. As we close out this forum and before questions, it's important to reflect on what's been discussed and what must follow. The call for an International Decade of Tolerance is a recognition that without deliberate and sustained effort, divisions will deepen and opportunities for understanding will be lost. Let this not be the end of the conversation, but the start of action. What we've discussed today shouldn't remain here. The proposal needs to lead to action. Governments must embed tolerance in policy, educators must integrate it into curricula, and individuals must practice it in their communities. It's not about broad ideals, but specific actions that ensure respect and understanding are not exceptions, but norms. Only through sustained commitment can we anticipate a future where mutual respect and understanding thrive. Collaboration across sectors, cultures, and borders will ensure diversity remains a strength, enriching societies and strengthening global stability. Hopefully today can mark the beginning of measurable progress toward a world where tolerance is more than a principle. It's a practice embedded in daily life, institutions, and in governance. As for our next steps in OIPMA, we will go ahead and present this call for an International Decade of Tolerance to the United Nations, urging member states to support its adoption. We will engage with international organisations, policymakers and civil society to ensure this initiative is not just heard but acted upon. Through advocacy, partnerships and continued dialogue, we will work to embed tolerance as a central pillar of global governance and education reform. Our hope is that this forum can serve as a foundation for real, enduring change, helping turn the principles of fraternity and tolerance into lasting global peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam McLachlan.